Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Matthew Morton. I'm here with the Parkinson Foundation of Oklahoma. Wendy Mobley, one of my co-workers, she's on here as well. We appreciate you all making it from all across the state. It looks like we've got Tulsa and Oklahoma City, north, south, east, and west. We appreciate you joining us today for this topic that I know we're always interested in. A brief introduction of Dr. Kloss, for those of you who do not know who he is. He's up here in the Tulsa area. He's of the Movement Disorder Clinic of Oklahoma here in Tulsa. And he's a movement disorder specialist. He completed his fellowship at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. He really has a passion for not only helping patients, but the entire family. Dr. Kloss will readily admit he also has a strong passion for research, taking part in several studies that really help advance Parkinson's care. And today he's excited to share, and I know we're excited to hear more information about what's up and coming with Dr. Kloss. He'll share with us. He's also recently written a wonderful book on Parkinson's caregiving. We have that on our YouTube page if you want to learn more about that. So he's a Mr. Do-It-All, but today he's going to help us understand kind of what's coming down the pipeline. So Dr. Kloss, I'll hand it off to you. And like I said, everybody, if you have a question, just type it in to the chat box and we'll get to it towards the end of the conversation. So thank you, Dr. Kloss.
Okay, Matthew, thank you so much for that kind introduction. And it's great to be with all of you tonight. And I do want to say that last chance that I had to speak with you, I went a little bit long and we didn't have much time for question and answers. So tonight I promise to give us more time for Q&A. I want to address as many questions as possible. I know many of you have those questions about research and new therapies, and so I want to get to those as best I can. I want to start off by telling you that probably the number one question that I get in the clinic is what's new for Parkinson's? What new treatment is out, or what's in the pipeline? And I have this very sweet patient who I've been seeing for the last 15 years now, and she has deep brain stimulation. So I see her at least every 3 months for a checkup. And every time she comes into the clinic, her first question is always, do you have a cure for Parkinson's disease today? That's always her opening question. And she's asked me that now about 60 times over the last 15 years. And I'm just waiting for that day that I can respond yes, to her. And so that drives our passion in looking for new therapies and working on the research side of this condition. I hope you can see the slides tonight. There we go. Okay, so tonight I want to give you the agenda of what I hope to cover with you before Q&A. First, I want to start with just a little background related to the pandemic that we're in and how that's affected research. And then I want to talk a bit about the Parkinson's disease pipeline globally. And then I want to end with a discussion of what's going on here in Oklahoma with research trials that really, I think, will be more specific to our patient needs here, as well as across the country. So you know very well that the WHO declared the coronavirus pandemic back in March 11th of this year. And this pandemic has obviously affected all of us in every industry, but especially in healthcare. It's also affected us personally in so many ways. And I bring this up to tell you that we're working through many challenges related to research in Parkinson's disease because of this pandemic. And I want to give you some examples of how the pandemic has already affected the current research programs globally, but then I want to tell you what we're doing about it and give you some hope and some optimism about the future ahead of us. So as you know, the coronavirus now is involved in over 216 countries. These are the figures from today. Over 45 million confirmed cases worldwide, over 9 million cases confirmed in the United States. And we all know that there's a rise in cases and hospitalizations. And so this is continuing to create unique challenges for all of us. I want to highlight just 5 examples of how this has already affected research in Parkinson's. So perhaps the first example is related to a new product that is now officially on the market. This is Ongentys. It's a picapone capsule made by Neurocrine. This drug was actually approved by the FDA back in April of this year. And they've had a long delay in their launch, and we're just finally getting their product out into the pharmacies here in the fourth quarter. And so some of these new therapies that we have are certainly becoming delayed getting into our hands. And tonight, I don't want to focus so much on the treatments that are on the market, but more of the treatments that are in the pipeline are coming. But if certainly you have questions about any of the new treatments that are on the market this year, please feel free to type those in the chat tonight. I do want to mention, though, briefly that over the last 6 years, we have had 16 new therapies come on the market for Parkinson's. So that's quite outstanding. And we've had 3 new therapies on the market just this year, despite the pandemic. So we're marching ahead, but obviously it's causing some challenges. Another example of a challenge is for a product made by Addix Therapeutics. They have a molecule called dipraglurant, which is a medication, it's an oral medication that may be able to slow down or stop the dyskinesia problem that many people have with Parkinson's disease. This is a novel therapy. We have an unmet need for more therapeutics to help with dyskinesias. And they were ready to launch this next study at the beginning of the year. It was February, March. We were just getting ready to start the trial at our clinic, as well as many others across the country. And because of the pandemic, the trial has been put on hold, and it's still on hold as of today. It still has not opened up. And so that has created, quite a bit of frustration for all of us as we were looking forward to testing this new medication and hoping to bring it on the market someday. Another example of a problem with research relates to a partnership between Denali and Biogen. They have created a molecule that can block an enzyme called LRRK2, LRRK2. Now, some of you may be familiar with the science behind this. I just want to briefly mention, not to get too detailed here in the science, but if we look at the genetic mutations that can cause Parkinson's disease, the most common one has to do with this enzyme, the LRRK2 mutation. And there may be individuals that do not have genetic mutations, but may still have part of the neurodegenerative process may involve this same enzyme, LRRK2. And so Biogen and Denali have created a compound that can inhibit this enzyme. And again, the hope here is that it will help either slow down or prevent some of the neurodegeneration that we see with Parkinson's disease. Unfortunately, because of COVID, the trial was put on hold, and it remains on hold as we speak. These trials that are on hold, we continue to be optimistic that they will open at some point. We just don't know when that time frame will be. Here's another example, the Restore 1 trial, a very exciting trial that was getting ready to launch. This is a gene therapy trial, and it actually involves a surgical procedure. So the idea here is that a gene therapy would be surgically introduced into the brain, and then the gene would produce enzymes that would help create more dopamine for patients. And so this had gained a lot of excitement in the research field. It still does, but the study is currently on pause. We have been in contact with the company and hoping that they will open up recruitment in short time, but we just, again, don't have a date on that. But this is a US study that will be opening hopefully soon, and will have a very novel approach to helping with symptoms of Parkinson's disease. And so finally, one more example, the Restore Bio study. This is an interesting compound. The company is based out of Boston, actually, but much of the testing previously has been done in Australia, New Zealand, but they have a compound called RTB101. And this is a molecule that inhibits an enzyme called TORC1. And this is interesting because it may not just be relevant to Parkinson's disease, it may be relevant to aging and maybe even to Alzheimer's disease as well. And the idea is if we inhibit this TORC1, this may help slow down the aging process in the brain. It might help slow down the cognitive changes that come both with aging and with neurodegenerative conditions like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease. It may improve the immune system. And so therefore we may see improvement in lifespan as well with this kind of technology. So again, this is another trial that's not quite off the ground yet. We're just waiting for the launch. And of course, the COVID pandemic is really playing a role in delaying some of these trials. And just on a personal note, I'll tell you that in our clinic in Oklahoma, we had 13 active clinical trials open for Parkinson's disease back in March, right before the pandemic was announced. And by April, just a month later, we were down to 2 active trials. So almost all of our trials were closed or paused or just outright discontinued. So this has been a major challenge for research, not just in Parkinson's disease, but all conditions this year. Okay. I do want to mention this website. I think if you're not familiar with it, it's one worth writing down or keeping in the back of your mind. It's called clinicaltrials.gov. So any clinical trial that is registered, especially here in the US with the FDA, that trial will be listed on this website. And they make it really easy to search. When you get to the start screen of this website, you can type in not only Parkinson's disease, but you can type in a symptom. Like if you were searching for a trial on constipation and Parkinson's disease, you could type those 2 search terms in. Or if you're looking for a specific trial, like one of the ones I just mentioned, you can type the name of the trial in and it will bring you right to the details of those trials. And it will tell you a lot of background information about the drug and who's making it, but it will also tell you what locations worldwide are actually testing or doing the research of that particular study. And they will give you contact information. So if you want to contact the study coordinator for that particular location, you can call them and ask them questions about the study and find out more to see if you might be a candidate or just to learn more about what the trial is doing. And once the trial closes, they will post the results on that same website as well. So it's a real handy site to keep in the back of your mind. Another one I might mention just quickly is the Michael J. Fox Foundation website, where you can sign up to learn about clinical trials that are going, and they will try to match you with available trials that might fit your needs. So you'll put your symptoms in and details about your Parkinson's disease. And if a trial matches your needs, they'll give you the name and contact information of the closest research site to your location. So that's another good place to consider, signing in and just to keep aware of what's going on. Okay, so there was a review article that came out this year that looked at how many clinical trials are currently active. Now, this was just prior to the pandemic, but I want to highlight that we have a robust pipeline. There was 145 active clinical trials worldwide in this distribution, as you can see on the world map, for therapies for Parkinson's disease. So, a very active pipeline. We have to be very encouraged and excited about that. And if we look at those particular trials, the 145 trials, this just breaks down what phase of study the trials were in. And again, this is just prior to the pandemic announcement. So you can see that it's really a distribution across phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 studies. And after the third phase, that's when a compound would go in front of the FDA and to see if it is approved to come on the market. I don't want you to get out a magnifying glass and try to read the fine print here. We will have these slides available. So if you do want to read the fine print and look at the different names of drugs that are listed here, you're welcome to do that. I'm showing you these pie graphs only to highlight what's happening in the research pipeline. So if we look at phase 3, this is the phase closest to the market where drugs will then come in front of the FDA if they show positive results. What I want you to see here is that if you look at the yellow section of the pie chart, you see that there's a strong representation of trials focusing on dopamine symptoms. So treatments that are designed to treat the dopamine related symptoms, tremor, stiffness, slowness of movement, on and off times, and all of that. And then another large portion of the trials are looking at non-dopamine symptoms. These are the symptoms like sleep problems, anxiety, constipation, memory difficulties, and so on. So you can see that the closest phase studies are really concentrating on symptoms, and very few are looking at disease modification or slowing progression. But then if we look at the phase 2 trials that are in the works, and again, this is the 145 trials that I just mentioned earlier, you can see that the group here is much more diverse. So in fact, the largest group here in phase 2 are designed to treat the non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's. So when we interview patients and we talk to patients and caregivers, we understand that many patients are actually bothered more by some of the non-motor symptoms than often the motor symptoms. So we might hear about fatigue and sleep problems and cognitive issues as some of the top symptoms that need to be treated. And so you're seeing a shift in the research now with more trials concentrating on those non-motor symptoms as we kind of go into the development of these molecules. And then finally, if we look at phase 1, you can see quite a diverse group here, much more trials designed for disease modification, for slowing progression, for trying to attack the disease itself instead of just looking at symptom relief. But certainly there's also compounds in phase 1 study to also help with Parkinson's symptoms, both motor and non-motor. So you can see what's happening in the pharmaceutical world. You see a shift happening where there's a focus on both non-motor symptoms, but also a focus on trying to slow the disease progression. So this is very exciting. And this is an unmet need. We have 39 therapies for Parkinson's disease on the market right now, but we don't have any that can slow the disease down or change the pathological process. So that's what we desperately need. And our trials are answering those needs, we hope, in very diverse ways, very unique ways. And I'm going to share some of those here tonight. So I want to shift now to our third section, which is to concentrate on what's happening here in Oklahoma now with research. And the good news is that we now have trials coming back online. So trials are opening back up. New therapies are launching. And part of this, despite the situation with COVID, is that companies are finding unique ways to try to deal with these challenges. So for instance, a lot of trials are looking at telemedicine and home delivery of the investigational products so that we can minimize risk to the patients. We can help them, possibly stay home and away from a high risk in-clinic situation if needed. And we're also seeing more and more research centers opening back up. So that was a big problem earlier this year, where we had so many neurological research centers across the country had closed their doors. They were either seen as non-essential for their particular healthcare system. At that point, they were diverting a lot of their staff to other locations to help the needs. And certainly that affects the recruitment numbers and the ability of companies to continue their trials. But now these groups are coming back, they're opening up their research centers, and we're seeing confidence now in the pharmaceutical companies opening up new trials or resuming trials that were on hold. Okay, so I want to share with you one of, I think, a very exciting research study that we actually initiated earlier this year. There's a compound made by Aptonix. This is a US-based company that has made a compound that modulates the MDA receptor. This is a receptor in the brain that has to do with cognition. And again, this is a symptom that I hear about all the time, and people are really looking for help in short-term memory, with learning, with executive function related to Parkinson's disease. In addition, mood and psychological symptoms as well as sleep problems are very common as well. Well, this particular study is designed to look at possible improvements in cognition as well as mood and sleep. And the study was started earlier this year. It's been put on hold, but we're hoping it's going to open back up again. And as you can see in this little cartoon, it's affecting certain receptors in the brain that we have not been able to modulate with any other drugs on the market so far. So this is a very unique treatment. This is not borrowed from the Alzheimer's disease therapy toolbox. This is actually being designed for Parkinson's disease itself. And so we're excited about the possibility here. We hope they'll open the trial back up very shortly. Next, I want to mention, of course, the majority of our patients are taking carbidopa-levodopa, the main gold standard dopamine therapy for Parkinson's disease. And as you know, one of the shortcomings that we see over time is that this particular drug, especially the immediate release tablet form of carbidopa-levodopa, becomes a drug that has a shorter and shorter duration of benefit. So we see over time what maybe used to be a 5, 6, maybe even an 8-hour long benefit from one dose becomes a 4-hour benefit, then becomes a 3-hour benefit, and before long, we're looking at an hour and a half or less for a symptomatic benefit. And I think many patients at that point are now looking for alternative treatments, such as the deep brain stimulation, because they're realizing this is very difficult to keep up that kind of pattern of taking a short-acting medicine so frequently throughout the day and night. You're aware that there's a product on the market called Rytary made by Impax Pharmaceuticals. This is a controlled release form of carbidopa levodopa. So same drug, but now a capsule that results typically in a longer duration of benefit. What I typically see in the clinic is about 4 to 6 hours of benefit from a dose of Rytary. And many patients have also experienced a little bit better on response in many cases with this product versus taking the immediate release form. Well, Impax Pharmaceuticals, they have now joined Amneal Pharmaceuticals. They have a trial ongoing, and this is one of the two that did not shut down. It's still open and running at our clinic as well as other clinics across the country. They have a new product. We call it the Rytary Plus or the Super Rytary. It's called IPX 203. And this is just, again, another carbidopa levodopa drug, but it's designed to last even longer than the Rytary that's on the market. We're seeing anywhere from as short as 6 hours, but often it's more closer to 8 or 12-hour long duration of benefit with this product. So that's a substantial improvement, especially for someone who's taking the short-acting carbidopa levodopa every hour and a half, to be able to now, in some cases, go 8 hours or longer in between doses. It certainly makes the protein issue and eating meals much easier for patients when they can spread the doses out longer. And many of the patients in our trial have experienced, on symptom improvement as well. But this is a trial that's still ongoing, so we don't have results yet. I'm showing you data from a previous trial that led to this phase 3 trial that we're running now. And so it's still open. We're still looking for patients that might be interested in becoming involved in this particular trial. Another goal of pharmaceutical companies is to find novel ways of delivering dopamine to the brain. And of course, we've had oral medications now for over 50 years, but AbbVie company has led the charge using pump therapy. So you may be familiar with Duopa. This is the pump system of carbidopa levodopa that goes through tubing into the intestine. It's a J tube that's put in through the stomach down into the small intestine to deliver a liquid gel of carbidopa levodopa. This obviously involves a procedure that some patients may not be interested in. And the picture here on the right of your screen shows a gentleman that actually has the Duopa system. So it can be worn on the outside of the body in a fanny pack with the tubing going underneath the clothes and then into the stomach through a stoma. We have just initiated a new trial, however, from AbbVie. Their second generation pump is now in a clinical trial. This is the study ABBV 951. But instead of delivering the carbidopa levodopa into the digestive tract, this is actually going to the skin. So this is a subcutaneous pump. So little patches are employed onto the skin, typically in the abdominal area. And then the pump, which is quite a bit smaller and lighter than the Duopa system, is similarly worn on the outside of the body in a fanny pack. But the medicine is now delivered under the skin. And the study will involve a 24-hour delivery of medication. So the hope is that we can achieve a very nice constant delivery of levodopa in place of taking the oral medication as frequently as many patients have to do. Now, to qualify for this study, you have to have at least 2.5 hours of off time per day on average. And there's a few other criteria that we look for, but if you already have the Duopa system, unfortunately, you're not a candidate for this study. This product will have to come on the market eventually before a Duopa patient could consider switching over to this particular pump system. I also want to mention that Neuroderm continues to have a subcutaneous pump system in trials. They are not recruiting patients at this time at our center, but we do have patients that are still receiving this particular therapy in a clinical trial. And here you can see a better diagram of what the pump looks like and how it's delivering the medication to a small patch that's on the skin, and the medication goes just right underneath the skin and the subcutaneous layers. And again, it's a 24-hour delivery system to alleviate the need of taking oral carbidopa-levodopa therapy. Okay, now I want to shift. So that's just to highlight some of the symptomatic treatments that we have currently open. I want to shift to the neurodegenerative process, the slowing down of the disease, which is so important for us to focus on. I'm showing you this diagram from researchers in Europe. Some pathologists by the name of Braak is the last name, B-R-A-A-K. They have done some beautiful studies over the years showing us how the pathology can spread throughout the brain over time. And we're talking about the Lewy bodies. We're talking about the pathology that's inside the cells and that's moving from cell to cell over time slowly. And you can see on the left side of the screen, it's really confined to the brain stem, to the olfactory area. That's the smell part of the brain, smell recognition. But over time, it moves. As you see the middle and then the right diagrams, it moves north and it spreads into other brain regions. And that's where we notice other symptoms, especially the non-motor symptoms, sleep problems, psychological symptoms, pain, all kinds of other symptoms may develop. And it really depends on where these Lewy bodies are spreading. And even though this is a general diagram of the possible progression, every patient has an individual situation as far as the pathological spread. So it may not go into all of these same regions necessarily for that individual patient. It may go one way and not the other, and then the next patient may have a completely different spread. But this is what we are trying to stop. We're trying to figure out a way to end this Lewy body progression that marches into the higher regions of the brain. And we have been grateful to be a part of a clinical study researching a vaccine for Parkinson's disease. We have been involved in the Pasadena study. You may have seen some recent press releases about the Pasadena trial. This is a phase 2 study. It's an IV infusion of a monoclonal antibody. This antibody is given once a month and it goes into the brain. And what it tries to do is attach to those Lewy bodies as they're spreading from one part of the brain to the next. So it's kind of like a defense system to grab onto the pathology and get rid of it before it can infect more cells throughout the brain, but it has to be replenished on a monthly basis by the IV infusions. We have just completed the second year of this study, and the results have been encouraging to Roche Pharmaceuticals that runs the study. So they have actually extended this group another 5 years of study, not for the desire to delay bringing the vaccine to market, but to study this group of individuals longer to see just how much possible slowing of the disease progression there may be. So this group that's in the study, they were newly diagnosed patients that by criteria could not be on Parkinson's disease therapy. So to enter the trial, they had to be naive to all medications and treatments for Parkinson's disease. And many of them, after 2 years of this trial, still remain naive to Parkinson's disease medications. We're continuing to be optimistic about this trial. The company Roche is getting ready to hopefully introduce a Pasadena 2 study, another study, possibly at the beginning of next year. And this study will allow early patients diagnosed, but that have already started medicine to still come into the trial. So the new trial will hopefully not penalize patients that have already started medication, but are still early on in the disease process. Now, if this study ends up working and the antibody comes on the market, it will certainly be worthwhile trying at any stage of Parkinson's. So this is not just a treatment for prevention of Parkinson's or for early stage Parkinson's. This could really be theoretically helpful at most stages. So this is a type of therapy that would be worth keeping your eye on. There are other companies that are making monoclonal antibodies that target the Lewy body spread through this protein called alpha-synuclein. And so they're a little bit behind as far as the phases of study, but they're close behind. And so we're hoping to have great competition and great availability of therapies down the road. And so this is the trial. It's an international study, the Pasadena study, and it's evaluating this monoclonal antibody that I mentioned listed here. We are also excited to initiate another possibly neuroprotective therapy trial by UCB and Neuropore. They have collaborated on a compound that is actually an oral therapy called UCB 0599. Now, this is a phase 1, so this is a very early clinical trial. But again, it's designed to try to stop the alpha-synuclein, this protein that folds up and eventually creates this Lewy body problem. And so the hope here is that this compound might be able to prevent the Lewy body formation, especially in cells that have not yet received the Lewy body spread. So this is a trial that we have been accepted into and will be starting at the first part of next year. And it's also quite a large trial. We have a third neuroprotective trial open at this moment in Oklahoma. The trial is called Neurali, and this is kind of interesting. It's a phase 2 trial, but what's interesting about it is the compound that they're testing is already on the market. So this is a drug that's being used for treatment of diabetes. Now, they have adjusted the compound so that it would actually go to the brain and have its effects on the brain instead of the pancreas. So we're not expecting patients that come into this trial to have blood sugar problems. And in fact, you're not allowed to have diabetes to be accepted into this trial at this time. But this particular medication, I'll show you here in a cartoon, it's targeting a receptor called GLP-1. So for the diabetic drug, that receptor is present in the pancreas, and so it can be helpful in regulating blood sugars. But this particular version of the drug would actually go to the brain and attach to the same receptors that are also present inside the brain. And the hope is that this will help to slow the neurodegenerative process of Parkinson's disease. The treatment itself is a subcutaneous injection. So it's delivered with a shot under the skin. It's a self-injection that you give to yourself once a week. And this trial has opened, and we have a number of assessments designed to monitor the progression, including the DAT scan and MRI technology that will monitor the pathological changes, but also we will be monitoring the clinical changes over time. Now, to be eligible for this trial, you have to be newly diagnosed and you cannot be on Parkinson's disease therapy. So like the first Pasadena trial, this is really a trial designed for those newly diagnosed that have the opportunity to participate and try something before they go on Parkinson's disease treatment. We are wrapping up a study from Alkahest. This is a small pharmaceutical company. The majority of the research sites for this trial were in Europe. They did open up 3 research sites in the US. Thankfully, we were one of them. And we've had a number of patients enter this trial, testing a compound. It's an oral medication called AKST4290. And this compound, the hope is that it will block the T helper cells that are involved in the inflammation and the attack on the brain neurons that lead to the degenerative process in Parkinson's disease. And so this is a pilot study. It's a very small study. We're looking for signals that this product may be helpful in Parkinson's disease. If we see that signal, it's a short study. It was a 3-month study, and it's basically closing next week. But our hope is if it's a positive study, this will lead into a larger trial in the US and Europe as well. And hopefully we'll see good things out of this product down the road. And then finally, we're hoping to have an opportunity to join another gene therapy trial. It's a surgical trial by Voyager Therapeutics. And it's a surgical implant of gene therapy directly into the brain. We will not be actually giving the surgical procedure here in Tulsa. We have partnerships with other surgical centers across the country that will be in the trial delivering the therapy. And our job will be to find patients that are interested and to monitor them after the procedure has been completed. So with that, I want to thank you for listening to my update, but I want to mention that, you know, out of the clinical trials that we see with Parkinson's disease, 85% of these trials are delayed, and about 30% never take off. And this is before the pandemic, and this has to do with patient participation. And so, you know, we continue to look for people that are willing to be a part of these clinical trials. We can talk about some of the benefits of these trials beyond just receiving a new therapy, including, you know, time that you spend in the clinic with the research team and the close follow-up and testing that occurs. But obviously, we have to keep in mind the risks of these trials and, of course, the alternatives as well. So we never push anyone to be in a trial, certainly if you come to our clinic, but we always want to keep people aware of what's going on and what opportunities they have. And there's many misconceptions about these trials as far as, will I get a placebo, or will I ever see the medication? And I want to tell you that many of these trials now have a protocol built in to where most trials you will receive the therapy at some point. Even if they do have a section where there's a randomized placebo-controlled arm of the study, they will usually then extend the study so that everybody can use the medication and try it out for themselves. So the trials are quite unique in Parkinson's disease. Some of the trials will just go ahead and let you take the medication and try it out. So, you know, we just encourage you to keep in mind these trials, but also to keep a watch on what's coming through the pipeline. So we're, again, very excited about the pipeline. I think we have to be optimistic despite all the challenges we've had this year, that there's just so much going on in research, and we're thankful for that. And we look forward to new products coming on the market. So with that, I'm going to stop and I want to spend some time with questions and answers if you have any. Thank you very much.
And Dr. Kloss, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here so we don't record the question and answer session.
Okay.
You know, anybody can really feel comfortable asking whatever they like. So I have